Hej och varmt välkommen till ett nytt avsnitt av Framtidens E-Handel. Mitt namn är Björn Pommas Benger och idag ska vi prata det som kanske är viktigast för direct-to-consumer brands år 2024 och framåt, nämligen content. Vi ska prata om hur man producerar content, om hur man skalar content, om hur man gör content internt, hur man outsourcar content. Vi ska göra det här med en kille som är expert. Han jobbar med det här, han har en byrå som jobbar enbart med det här. Han är från Kanada så vi kommer prata på engelska och han driver ett bolag som heter Rework. Varmt välkommen till podden. Welcome to the podcast, Paul Giurgeu.
That's me, baby. What's up? Content. That's the only thing I understood, but we'll keep that's the only relevant part.
That's a tough second name to pronounce.
It's a tough second name to pronounce, yeah, but you got it right. You did it. Again, we've had a lot of bad pronunciations throughout these 24 years of my life, so this is, all things considered, very good job.
Great to hear. Paul, you're traveling a lot. You flew into Sweden 1 or 2 days ago. What's the places you've been to in the past 2-3 weeks?
Excellent question. All over the world. So I was in Canada since the beginning of August. Then I was traveling around Canada, traveling around the United States. So I was in Vancouver, San Diego, New York, and then flew back from Canada at the end of September. And then I was in Belgium and have been in Belgium since then. My team is from Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium. I mean, half the team's from Antwerp, the other half from Riga, Latvia. And then last week we were shooting a campaign for one of our clients, Monos, in Italy. And then 2 days ago, flew here to see you.
Okay, cool. Amazing. And what do you think about Stockholm when you get here?
It's actually quite similar to this part of Canada called Muskoka. So I'm from the east coast of Canada, Toronto. Well, again, not actual Toronto, like an hour and a half south of Toronto, but for all intensive purposes, we'll call it Toronto. An hour and a half north of that is where you get this thing called the Canadian Shield, which looks quite similar actually to the Swedish archipelago. So you have these like rock formations, you have these trees that are coming out of the rock formations, lots of islands, lots of lakes. I'm pretty sure Canada has the largest source of fresh water in the entire world, and that's all from like the thousands of lakes that we have. So it looks very similar to, like, obviously not the center of Sweden, but as soon as you get a little bit outside of it, very, very similar. So it's quite homey, actually.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
And you're a child actor, right?
I am a child actor, my friend.
Tell me about
10
it.
years of my life. That was, so like, my dad was always the type growing up to put me into whatever he could find. Any sports. I did chess, I did piano, baseball, basketball, soccer, like it didn't matter. Anything that came our way, he was like, okay, you have to try it. And nothing really stuck. I wasn't the best at chess. I kept doing piano, but I didn't enjoy it. Sports was not really my thing. And then one day he heard this commercial on the radio for this acting school in Toronto. And he's like, why don't you try that? And, 8-year-old me was like, damn, this basketball thing, I'm not really too sure about it. But I do like the sound of being famous. That is something that attracts me. So I went to this acting school in Toronto. It turns out it kind of was a scam. It was like a sell you on this dream, be this big Hollywood actor, whatever. But that got my feet in the door and like actually got me kind of in like the acting industry. Definitely not the cheapest or fastest way to do it, but it was a way. And then from that, again, I was 8 years old at the time, didn't really know what any of this meant. Like, it was really like my dad who was managing everything and all of the negotiations and all of the relationships. But I got my first agent when I was like 8 or 9. Then, anyone who's in acting or modeling knows that like that's the only way that you get jobs. So once you have an agent, they start sourcing deals for you and start sending you to auditions. And you go to auditions, you just say like a monologue, and then if you get the part, you're casted and you go into the production. And it took a while until I got like my first big break. I would say like 2 or 3 years maybe of just audition after audition, small little projects. And then when I was, I think like around 10 or 11, I had this voice coach, and it was like this voice coach who did voices for children, like for children's TV shows. Her name was Sunday Muse, great woman. And she knew the producers of a pretty big network in Canada called Chorus. And Chorus owned a big franchise called Franklin. It's been a show that's been around for thousands of years. A lot of people who are born in North America know about the show. And then because she was close to the people who were producing the show, they were looking for a new voice for one of the characters on this show, Franklin. And that's kind of where I came in. They had this policy where like they don't use any adult voices. So all the children in the show were actually voiced by children. And the thing with that is that like your voice changes as a child. So after a few years of doing this, they have to replace you. And the bear on the show is like a bunch of animated animals that were on the show. his voice was starting to change and they kind of needed to swap him out. So that's where I came in, and she put me in touch with like the casting directors, and I auditioned for it. And then it was like 2 or 3 auditions and I got the role. And that was like, I remember I was in grade 4 at the time, and my parents woke me up and they had this like note on the table, and like they had all the cameras out and everything. I'm like, what's going on here? And I like opened the note, and it said like, yeah, you got the role for Franklin. And I was like the most ecstatic I think I'd ever been. I was on cloud 9. I'm like, damn, I made it. That's my big break. So I did that for 3 years. I did Franklin and Friends for 3 years, and that was like my start into like real acting. And then from there I did a couple other animated like voice stuff, but also on camera things. I did a bunch of commercials for a bunch of big brands, and I did that until the end of high school. And that was kind of like the first career thing that I ever did in my life. That was the start.
Why did you quit as an actor?
That's a good question. So again, I got into it as a child because my dad was kind of like, go try things. And I think it's very similar to sports. Like a lot of people get into whatever, basketball, baseball, hockey, and they love it and they continue to a certain level. But then it's like, okay, is this actually something that I am going to do professionally for the rest of my life, or is it just a hobby? And that was the same question that I had when I was acting. And it was something that was like more so a hobby, more so something you do as a kid. And then in grade 12, so at the end of high school, when you have to make all these decisions around like, what do you actually want to do in life? Where do you want to go? Acting was not something that I felt I actually wanted to dedicate my entire life towards. And that's like the critical part where you're like, I either take this on as a full-time thing and I'm an actor, or I try something else.
But today, when you're, creating content for hundreds of different brands, you're basically an actor still, right? You're still with their products in front of the camera.
Sure, yeah. I'm usually not camera facing for the most part. I'm like behind the scenes, business development, sales, stuff like this. I don't usually touch any of the content part. We have used me as a like prop in some of the commercials and some of the UGCs that we've done, but not for the most part. I also do most of the voiceovers for our UGCs, given, again, the voice acting skills, if you can't tell on the podcast.
It's amazing. Your voice is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, voice actors are quite expensive, good ones to source. So that's why I usually do most of the voice for our UGCs.
And how about the money? I'm just curious. So you make a bunch of cash when you're below 18 years old. And either way, the parents just put it on the bank account and you get access to it when you're 18. Or they spend it.
Right. So I don't know where that money is. I didn't have this like bank account that I had access to when I was 18, for better or for worse. My relationship with my parents, which I think was a very good one and very like mature on their part, was like, I didn't touch the money ever. But as I was like still in school, they had this policy where like we all kind of contribute towards the same pool of money. And we're all like, you contributed towards it, we contributed towards it, you didn't use it when you were a kid. So when I was in like high school and university, I had access to their funds, which was amazing. And that really taught me, because I was like, well, actually, I worked and contributed towards this. And I somewhat understand the value of money, because I actually worked for it and I put my sweat and tears. And it wasn't easy, like all these auditions, everything, like you actually get to see what it takes to make money. And because of that, most people would assume that, okay, once you have daddy's credit card, for example, you just go and you spend it on whatever lavish things. But I actually was quite restrained, and like from an internal standpoint, I was like, okay, well, I contributed towards this like pool of money. I think, I should spend it wisely and not spend it on things that are dumb and outrageous. So I don't think I made any like crazy outrageous obviously my parents would have said something if I did, but they were pretty like lenient towards like what I was spending money on, and I managed it myself since high school. And so I think that gave me like a really strong basis and strong foundation to like going into adulthood, knowing how to spend your money and not blowing cash just because you have like what seems like an unlimited.
So they basically paid for private school.
Yeah, they paid for school, they paid for everything until I left university.
Okay, makes sense. And you still got to do that in Canada.
What? You still got to pay for school?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to pay for school. Yeah. I mean, it's not as expensive as it is in the States. It's usually like anywhere from like 40 to 80 up to 100,000 a year in the States. In Canada, it's like 10 grand a year.
Okay.
So it's not nowhere
in
near
Sweden, you get paid to go to school.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, it would have been nice as a student, as a taxpayer. I don't know how nice that would have been, but yeah, I don't know how I feel really about getting paid to go to school.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, this is like a transition into the next topic. So what's the difference between making business in the States, in the US, in America versus in Europe?
Sure. Making a business is one thing, which I don't know much about. Like, I've really only like actually created a company in North America, in Canada, which I would say is easier than what I've seen in Europe. I'm obviously not that proficient around like business regulations and stuff in Europe, but I think it is easier to have like an entrepreneurial venture in Canada, for example. It's super easy to register a company. You have to do your taxes every year, but like it's, I think, much easier than in Europe. Actually conducting business and how people do business is very different though. So we've seen that a lot with what we do now at Rework. We have clients all across the world. Most of our clients are in the States, but at the beginning we had quite a few who were in Europe. So, you get on sales calls, you kind of have the same pitch, but you really need to adapt it. Like there is a very strong difference between how Europeans take things and how North Americans take things.
In what way?
So every single person we've ever gotten a call with who was from New York, it was the shortest sales calls of my entire life. It was either like 5 minutes and this is not for us, thanks, goodbye. Like I didn't even finish the pitch. I didn't even finish saying what I had to say and they're already like, okay, gotta go, bye, after 5 minutes. Or on the other hand, which was equally as surprising, after 5 minutes of me going into the pitch, they cut me off and they're like, yep, this is exactly what we need. Send me next steps. It was a pleasure meeting you. Bye-bye. And they closed the call and that's it. Like 10 or 15 minutes has been the longest sales call I've ever been on from someone in New York, versus in Europe, I've been on sales calls that have been like an hour and a half long. And it's not even sales. It's just talking about life and business and this and like that. I have never in my life experienced dealing with anyone who's from the States, like really specifically New York. That's the biggest extreme. So yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest differences is in Europe, you can really go into the small talk and into the, like it's more relationship building. In the States, it's like, what value can you provide? Don't waste my time. If this is something of value, let's do it. If not, then let's part ways.
Yeah, and that is quite nice, the transparency and the efficiency that creates. But it's also quite nice to do the small, small talk.
If you could have some sort of an in-between, sometimes you get these in-betweens where it's like, we can put up a little bit of a show and we can create some kind of, and pretend that we're actually interested in each other's lives for a bit. Like, let's not do this for an hour and a half, but like 10 minutes, like, come on, it's not that big of an ask. And then we can go into like the details of the business and is this something of value or not? So yeah, the directness is a pro and a con, but you need to know how to navigate these things in like a global environment. So.
Yeah, cool. And tell me about Rework, your company.
So Rework has been kind of the amalgamation of a combined 15 years of experience between myself and my two co-founders we've all kind of been in like the e-commerce marketing space. I met one of my co-founders when I was working for a e-commerce brand in Belgium called Suspicious Antwerp, and they were purely influencer marketing. So they popped up in 2017. They got really big off of influencer marketing. Yoon Olsen actually was one of their influencers. That's how I actually started knowing about Yoon and about kind of what he was doing. Actually, kind of probably the reason why we're here today. And so, yeah, we met at Suspicious. We'd all kind of been in the marketing space, not always in content marketing, but we'd all had our respective experiences in marketing for e-commerce. And then we kind of came together. The conditions were fit to do so at the end of last year. Our projects kind of wrapped up, our personal lives were kind of aligning, and things fell into place more so in like a business sense. And one of my co-founders had just finished working for another e-commerce brand, Oliver Cabell. They're a sneaker manufacturer from the States. They make these like leather white sneakers, and they're doing big numbers. And they're only running ads. Like that is entirely like 110% what they're doing. And she was essentially in charge of their entire advertising strategy and advertising content strategy. And she scaled the brand, tripled their revenue in a year and a half just from the content that she was able to produce and like the content strategy. Nothing else really changed except for the content. And I was like, that is such a powerful, there must be some value there. There must be other brands in this space who also need a similar thing. So we put our minds together. My two co-founders, they're more in like the content side of things, Stella and Fleur, love them to death. They're more into like the content execution, actual creative aspect of things. I'm more in like the business development strategy, client relation side of things. And we put our skill sets together. And like I said, end of last year, we started Rework on the assumption that content is of value to brands. That is, we didn't know much else, but that was like, that's what our assumption was. And that's been what we have been validating for the past 8 or 9 months. We've been actually working on it full time. And it turns out that that is a accurate hypothesis, that people actually do need content. And that is something.
So there is a demand for your services.
There is a demand for our services, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the market, there is one of the most common business models in the past 2-3 years is probably, let's start a marketing agency. So you set up ads, you do follow-up calls and shit like that. And I think that is also a business model that probably will be dying in the next few years as the meta algorithms and the Google algorithms, become better and more efficient. And it's almost like the performance agency as a business model will be exchanged with the content agency business model. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's different ways of looking at it. When you say like performance agency, are you talking about like an agency who comes in and takes like an equity stake in the company and really becomes more involved in it?
No, rather they run your ads,
Oh, I see. Okay. As opposed to you doing it in-house.
Yeah.
It depends. For a small brand, I don't think they will ever have the internal resources to be able to afford someone who can actually do this properly. And it's not something that for a small brand, it's worthwhile to have someone come in full time and to really develop those resources out internally full time. So I think, yeah, this agency component will always exist. Now we're in like a transitionary period where a lot of brands are realizing that this is what they need. And a short-term fix is working with a third-party provider or an agency. Is that going to stay for big brands who eventually can develop the internal competencies to like subsidize that or to kind of bring that in-house? I don't know, maybe. But I do think that, yeah, you will see eventually bigger brands who have the budgets and have the capabilities start to develop those resources in-house. Because one thing that we have learned, and kind of one of our selling propositions, which in some way might work actually against our favor, is that consistency is arguably one of the most important things in advertising that a brand can do. And consistency along production assets. So you have high value production assets, you have your high-end shoots, your high-end campaigns, which for the most part brands have been able to do and have been able to source in-house for the past couple of years. So that's not something that we can really provide a competitive edge on. Now that brands realize that more of this organic UGC style content is what converts and is what people want to see, they don't have the internal assets to produce that. And they, for the most part, have just been going to like individual content creators. Problem with that is you don't have consistency. Every single ad that an individual content creator produces does not look very brand native and does not look homogenous in the overall advertising landscape. So that is, again, what I think we provide as a value add in our services is we have a very clear, I guess, image that we try and represent in a very clear style. If that aligns with your brand and your brand's persona, then that's great. We can kind of be on the same page and we can produce assets that are more organic, more brand focused and native to the brand, but still maintain this like UGC aspect of things. So to my point, that is something that I think would be of value for companies to start developing in-house because, again, consistency and quality of assets across the production line is extraordinarily important. So, yeah. Could be for the smaller brands, no, I don't think it'll be something that they'll easily replace because it's just like there's no scale in that. Like you can't hire a team if you're making $50K a month, for example, or you're spending less than that a month on Facebook ads. But for big brands, it might be something that they eventually catch up to and start developing in-house.
Why is content important for digital advertising?
Why is content important? Why is content not important? Is a better question. But I think what happened was, brands that have been heavily reliant on performance marketing, on Facebook ads, on Instagram ads, on TikTok ads, for the most part, have been doing advertising in an interest-based setting. So you have kind of your idea of what your customer archetype is. And you could, in the past, very specifically target one type of person and only show ads to that one type of person.
Tesla owners,
exactly. Or pregnant moms. Like that's a very, very good category to be in. What happened a year and a half ago, more or less, was Apple introduced these privacy restrictions on iOS. 80% of users are on iOS. So this was a huge, huge thing for advertisers that essentially restricted them from being able to do a lot of interest-based targeting. So I'm not in the technicalities of things, but how I would explain it to someone who, like, my base level knowledge of things is like, Facebook was able to pull a lot of information from your device that was able to tell it a lot more about you than it knew. And so it could sell that information to advertisers in the sense of me as an advertiser, I could go in and create really hyper-targeted interest-based ads to people like you. Now I can't do that anymore. So Apple said, we're not giving that data to Facebook anymore. We're being much more restrictive on things. Figure it out. And what happened was there was this huge collapse in advertising at the time. Advertisers who were spending millions and millions of dollars on this interest-based advertising no longer had access to those features. Those features were not profitable anymore and did not work, and they had to completely switch their advertising strategy. So people lost a lot of money. There was this big kind of like adpocalypse in the advertising space. Now, why is content relevant in this? Like, why is that the solution? I think it's because before, you could produce one piece of content. And you could say, let's give an example. I want this piece of content to be shown to 3 different audiences. Let's say pregnant women, for example, women who just got a divorce, or women with a high discretionary income. Those are my 3 audiences. That's who I think my cream, let's say, for example, is going to be most profitable towards. And I could test with one piece of content which one of these 3 audiences reacts best to my product and my message. Now I can't do that anymore. Now I don't know if you're pregnant. I don't know if you're recently divorced. I don't know if you have high discretionary income, right? So what I have to do now is I actually have to produce 3 different types of ads with different messaging that resonate to each of these 3 different categories, push them into the Facebook algorithm and kind of hope that they're shown to the right people and assess based off of that content who my target market actually is and what content is going to do best with which particular audience. So that's kind of what the shift has been in the last year and a half. I can't go to Facebook and say, I want you to only show these ads to person X, Y, and Z. I have to create content and hope that the Facebook algorithm pushes it to those people. And then I have to learn from that content who is my target demographic, what message resonates best with them, and how can I create more that further inspires them to purchase my product and be interested in my brand. So that is, to answer your question, why content is extraordinarily important in today's day and age, because it is one of the, if not the only way to test and really understand who your target customer is, what message resonates best with them, and how to keep pushing them on the funnel and pushing them to buy your product, essentially. So that's the only way to do that.
Yes, so Meta basically has access to less data than before, but also combined with the rise of AI that starts to automate the targeting for you. So the actual work you do in the advertisement platform, whether that is Google or Meta or whatever, it's not as important. The competitive edge of doing that well is not as big as it used to be before. So since that process is much more automated today, the new competitive edge is content.
100%.
So everything is about content, and I'm super curious because we're going to talk for hours.
Excellent. That's what
about
I like to hear.
Exactly this.
It's the most important thing
today, and why it's important. But my first question is, since you cannot target certain target groups anymore, I would assume you have to create a content piece that you think is suitable for a certain target group, so that the algorithm picks it up and shows it to the Tesla owners or to the pregnant women or whatever that is. So how do you predefine those content theses before you even go into the shoot?
So that's really a discussion that you have with the brand. Usually a brand has some sort of an understanding around who their customer is. They know if they're targeting pregnant women or if they're targeting Tesla owners, roughly the type of, the customer type and archetype that they're working with. But there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Like, let's go one of our clients, for example, Koyo. They're a leather shoe manufacturer from the States. And they know that their customer audience is men roughly aged between 20 and 40 who have these kind of characteristics, this much income, but that's about it. That's a very, very wide category that they're targeting. The second step is like, okay, we know that this rough category is who we're working with. What are different verticals that we can pursue? And what are the messages that might resonate with each of those verticals? So back to the pregnant women example, you have a cream. To a pregnant woman, you might sell different aspects of your cream, different aspects of your brand, as you would to someone who's recently divorced. Someone who's recently divorced might care more about how pretty it makes them look in a social setting, how presentable it makes them look. Someone who's pregnant might care more about like how this makes me feel, how I get up in the morning and I don't look terrible, and the image that I have towards myself. Bad example, but those are different messages, different pain points, different things that we target. It's the same general group. It's women between the ages of 30 and 50 that we're targeting, but the pain points, the messages, they're completely different. And it might not look immediately obvious, but those two pieces of content might speak volumes to an advertiser around who we should target and who we should focus our money and our effort on. Should it be the pregnant women? Should it be the recently divorced women? I don't know. The only way to test is by producing content and having kind of this hypothesis behind what you make and behind the messaging of what you do to try and uncover that and try and answer those questions.
So if you have, let's say, a brand that is, you start from scratch, you have no revenue at all, you can only guess what your target audience is going to be, right? Or if you have a brand that makes, 5 to 10 million euros yearly, you already have some data, but it's still kind of rough assumptions of who your target group is, right? So let's dive into that. It almost sounds like the step number one is sitting down with the brand team, discussing what does our brand mean and what is our core target audience.
Yeah, I mean, that is an extraordinarily important conversation for anyone to have, regardless of what marketing facet you're in and what department of like this whole chain of marketing you're in. But it is something that, and I think this is actually why performance marketing and content marketing is an extraordinarily valuable form of advertising. And it's because we no longer have to make assumptions. Before it was like, let's say, in the olden days, if you're running a billboard a company had to be very sure who they were targeting, what they wanted, and what their message was going to be, because that billboard is $50,000. It's going to run for a month. We can't move it. We can't change it. We can't do anything. So we really have to be sure that we're going for the pregnant women here, because if that's the wrong assumption, that's costing us a lot of money. It's very slow to change, and it's very slow for us to collect data and collect feedback if that ad is working, right? Takes a month to run an ad on a billboard, for example. Takes 1 or 3 months after that to assess the performance of that ad, see how that contributed to revenue, how that contributed to overall profitability of my company. And then I can start making new decisions. I can start running. Like, that's like 6 months, and I've done 2 ads, right? I've done 1 iteration on that ad. Whereas now, we can go in and we can run 50 different ads at the exact same time. And if we have enough money, it's not very cheap to run 50 ads at the same time and collect relevant data. But if you have the money to do that, in a few days or weeks, you can get very valuable insights on what's working and what's not. You can see, again, you feed that into the algorithm, you see what works, you see what doesn't. Facebook makes those decisions and tells you what's working for you. And you can very quickly iterate on that feedback, iterate on that data, and make new content and new pieces that further target the groups that we want to target. So moral of the story is like, yeah, before it was very, very important to understand who we're getting our message in front of and what that message is, because it was very expensive and very hard to change what you were putting out in the world, right? And the feedback cycle was very, very long. Now that's completely shifted. Now we can take much more risk. We can make many more assumptions, and we can create many more hypotheses. And that's actually something that has been hard for some brands to understand, because some brands are like, no, we know that this is our target market. We know that we don't want to change this. But it's like no one really knows. No one really has the answer towards what works, what customer demographic is going to be best for you. The only person that knows is the data. Like, that is the only thing that reliably can tell you, yes, this is the right decision.
And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to deep dive into how you scale the production of content. We're going to talk about how you A/B test. Yeah. We're going to talk about how much ad spend you got to put behind each content piece in order to test it and see whether it works or not. But I'm still at the stage on, we have a brand. The brand has certain values. Yeah. We have an idea of who our target group is. Right. And that kind of is one part of it and defines like how you shoot the content. But another part of it is that affects a lot how you edit it and what you push in the ads is the USPs. So, exactly what USPs are less or more sticky towards, certain target groups. So let's start with our workshop. We have 2 brands here, right? We have one brand that makes 10 million euros in revenues. We have another one that makes 0. We have a third one that makes, let's say, 300 million euros in revenues. They sit down in a brand workshop. They basically say, this is our brand, this is the values of our brand, this is our target group, or these are our target groups, and we think these are our USPs. So how do you translate that into different content pieces that you shoot, where you pick the environment, the location, the vibe, the shoot, basically? How do you come up with this content thesis that you want to test in an ad setting?
Sure. Okay. So I'd actually break it down into 3 or 4 different categories that you can individually test inside of one ad. One is the actual message. That's the USP. That's like, those are the pain points that you're targeting. Those are the features of your product that you're targeting towards a specific audience. Second is the actual product. So a lot of companies have more than one product, and they don't know, like, Saint Normal, for example, which one is the most worthwhile for us to invest our time and energy and effort into? Is it the shoes? Is it the jeans? Is it the shirts? Is it the hoodies? I don't know. You don't know. Let the data decide. So product is a second category. Third category is everything particular to the visuals inside of an ad. You can get very, very hyper-focused on the minute details, which we have seen, like, if you work with a brand for long enough, those things become relevant. But this is kind of like the chain of command. So first is like, actually, maybe I would put product first, because that's like, what are you selling? Second is what unique attributes of that product are valuable to your customer demographic, and which one should you focus on? Third is more of those minute details inside the setting, how the ad looks, what parts of the shoe you're showing, for example. And then the last component is like the music, the style of voiceover. That's like very, very minute things. The font, like, that's if you have a lot of money to test and you're really down that, everything you've nailed perfectly, then you can start testing those things. So let's start up at the top, product. We might have different product categories. We might have different customer categories and different customer verticals that might resonate with each of these different products differently. This is also a way for brands to do product testing and as a way for them to validate perhaps new product ideas. But at the core stage of things, it's like, well, what do we invest our money and time into? We have a luggage brand. We have 3 different lines of luggages, of suitcases. What is the most worthwhile for each product category, for each customer category, and what should we invest our time into? So very simple answer to your question is, okay, you shoot one ad with each product category and you see which one for each product demographic, each customer demographic does best. That's easy. Second is, like I said, the unique selling propositions, the pain points, the customer verticals, the features that you highlight on that particular ad. That is communicated, I think, in the most effective way. Like if you're doing a true UGC with like a voiceover, what's the content of that voiceover? That really speaks towards like customer psychology, buying behavior, how you can really get in front of people and pry that pain point out of them and make that really stick with them. And then how can you what features of your product do you highlight? Just like we saw in C'est Normal, the shoe is a shoe and it has hundreds of different features in it. It's waterproof, it's versatile, you can wear it to the club, you can wear it out on a run, it's comfortable. Like, okay, we can't say all of these things. We can't say there's 50 different features of the shoe. We have to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 at most, and we have to see which ones do best. I am not the one to tell you, and neither are you, which one of those features is most relevant and is going to work best with our customer demographic. So, okay, you've chosen the product category. You want to focus on shoes for this first round of testing. Inside of that, what are the 5 features, or how many features can you make a list of all the features of your product? Choose what you think are the most important and test those. See how that works. And always do that in an A/B format. So run one ad where you choose feature X, Y, and Z, and one ad where you choose feature A, B, C. Keep everything else constant. Keep, as close to perfect consistency as possible. And if you test that long enough, you test enough variation so you can change the underlying asset. But if you keep those USPs and you keep those features the same, you can have meaningful data at the end of, depending on how much money you put towards this, a week, 2 weeks, which one of those features resonates most with our client. That might change. And that is, I think, a very important overarching caveat to put on top of all of this. A lot of brands think that like, okay, we are aiming towards finding the winning creative. And once we find that, it's going to work forever. Because in the past, it kind of was like that. Like you could have an ad that worked for a year and that was your top performer and nothing else overpassed it. And like we found it and it works and that's great. Now that is very much shifted. Now the rate at which people consume content has dramatically increased and people's tolerance for old content has dramatically decreased. So you see winning ads come up and it's great performance and that stays for like 2-3 weeks and then it drops and then you need something new. And then maybe it's a seasonality thing with your product, like the shoes, for example. So, okay, you found what works, but a big caveat to all of this is like, that is not to say that that will always work. So always test, always iterate. That is why content is another reason why it's the most important thing, because it's always changing. It's always adapting. It's always evolving. So you always have to be on top of things. You always have to be trying something new, because what you don't want is to think that you found what works, stop producing, and then at one, oh, what's happening? It's starting to decrease. It's not working anymore. Fuck, we got to get the ads back up. We got to get testing back. You always have to be testing, always be pushing the limits of what is possible and what can bring you maximum performance. So back to this kind of like funnel. We did step 1 is product. Step 2 is the actual USPs, features of that product. Step number 3 is the visual things, which again, at the beginning, I don't think is that important. But once you've nailed those first 2, for example, we Oliver Cabell, one of my co-founders, like I said, was working there. She found that, after 6 months of testing content, they could get as specific as to like, okay, sure, hook is important. Hook is the first 3 seconds of an ad. That is, I would say, actually important even before you get into the minute things. But as simple as like someone holding the shoe performed better than the shoe on someone's foot. It was very important in every ad to have a color wheel with all of the shoes and the different colors in the shoes in that color wheel. That is like, that's a small thing. Like that I don't think is important to try and test at the beginning, because there are millions of different, ways to shoot the product and different combinations of things. But at the end, like once you have the ability to get that minute and get that detailed on things, that can be something that is of value. So they saw it again. The color wheel was very important. Shooting on a light background was very important. People really they were targeting males, younger males in the United States. I would say as a whole, males are more oriented towards and attracted towards the details of a product. They really want to see the close-ups. They want to see the leather. They want to see the stitching. They want to see the lacing. They want to see the embroidery, the embossing. Women are more focused on like the entire appearance and how this product contributes to their overall appearance. sense? So anyways, back to, again, these are like minute things that you can change in your environment and what you show, which take a lot of testing, a lot of time, and I don't think are worthwhile for you to invest if you don't even know what product category is worthwhile for you. But, for Oliver Cabela, for example, the company she was working for, they knew it was this one sneaker that was doing best. It was their triple white, their all white sneaker. So they had the product category down. They had their USPs. They knew that, affordability was something that their customers really resonated with, that quality was something their customers really resonated with. Now it's time, and we have the luxury to go into these small, minute details. So that's step number 3. Step number 4 is then like, okay, you can really get nitty and gritty with these things in the font, in the voiceover, in the music that you choose. And it's all a priority thing. Sure, if you have $10 million to test on ads, you can go crazy. You can produce 100,000 different pieces of content, different ads. But if you don't, which most brands don't, I would say it's worthwhile for you to go down this kind of like 4-stage process. And once, if you've really found, the best product, the best USPs, the best different shot angles, then sure, go into the small things like the font and the music, but don't focus on that in like step 1.
And I think most brands are in step 2 right now, because step 1 is quite straightforward. What you do there is to simply take your top sellers and prioritize these products, because you can assume those products convert better in ads. If you look at step 2, you're talking about USPs, but USPs, it also constantly changes, and maybe you come up with new products and product lines or new product USPs, and it hits me that it's all about prioritizing, isn't it? So you have so many things. There's a million different things you can switch or exchange. So what you got to do is to become really, really, really good at prioritizing.
Yeah, if you're working with a limited budget, that's the only solution. That's the only answer.
But we all have a limited budget, right?
Well, some more limited than others than others. But yeah, I mean, sure, prioritization is something that is important.
How often is it that you think, the product USP is 1 and 2 and 3, but then you see that the product USP is something totally different?
Pretty often, more often than not. And I would say it's a combination, like that second category is a combination, like I said, of USP, of pain point. It's really diving into the marketing psychology of things. And you can get really elaborate in this. Like, you have a shoe, for example. What are we trying to target? What is the message we're trying to get across? Is it like the best Italian sneaker that you can get for a really affordable price? That speaks to one certain target demographic. And then sure, we want to highlight price as number 1. Second is quality. Third is craftsmanship. But we also have another category of customers which might be of interest to us, which is like they have high discretionary income. They don't necessarily care that it's super affordable and that they can get this like really luxury product for really cheap. What they care about is finding the best deal. They don't want to be ripped off. They don't want to go for the golden gooses, because that's all marketing. You're paying $750. $650 of that is just for the marketing. That's all you're paying for. The rest is for the actual shoe. They don't want to feel like they're getting ripped off. They want the best deal. They have money to spend. They don't care about the price. They care about, again, it's this like, you have to convince them that this is actually the best deal, that you can do all your research, that you can do all of your testing, but you're still going to come back to the same conclusion that this is the best product and the best bang for your buck at this price point. So yeah, category number 2 and step number 2 is features. That is the most obvious way of looking at things. But hand in hand with that, and speaking more to a broader concept, is of this like marketing psychology and customer behavior psychology, which you have to uncover through these things. Again, features and USPs are one very tangible way of doing that and very tangible way of testing that. But this speaks towards a more broader category of, like I said, marketing psychology and customer behavior.
And I'm thinking, if a brand is quite well known, you also push different things versus if a brand is brand new. So sure, yeah. If it's a brand new product or a brand new brand, I assume you have to go much more into, the product USPs itself. Like in this shoe, you can run your fastest 10K ever, while if it's an Acne or a similar brand that has been around for quite a while, you push totally different values.
Yeah, I would say for a smaller brand, you definitely have to do more social proofing. That is definitely something which is of value to people who are just starting out. That is, though, something which I think in recent times has become more diluted because a lot of people have been able to fabricate. And I think consumer demand as like an overall trend, consumer trust in brands and in the social proofing has degraded because of that. And by social proof, it's anything that, featured in Forbes, GQ, Men's Health, 15,000 5-star reviews, 4.9 Trustpilot score. Like these are all things that if I don't have a reliable brand image and I don't have the Adidas logo to back up my company, are ways of me convincing you that this is something that you should invest your time and energy into and your money into, and is not a scam. And like I said, it's been something which brands have been able to fabricate, and you can get into the gray black market side of things on that end. And I think some customers have caught on to that. I still think it works. But yeah, definitely for a smaller brand, social proofing is something very valuable and very important, and is really the only way to communicate quality and credibility in a market that you have to compete with Adidas and Nike. And we're like, yeah, obviously they've been around for a billion years. I can't compete with them on a superficial level. So I have to convince you that I am actually a trustworthy, incredible brand. And then I can sell you on why my product is better than them. Otherwise, you're never going to take me seriously.
And we were talking about prioritization and the importance of prioritization. And my question is, how do you prioritize then? And again, to prioritize product, meaning step one, is quite simple because you just take the top sellers. But when you start prioritizing the soft values, such as the USPs, how do you prioritize well?
I mean, I think you can always break it up into, a product is not going to have a million different features. You can think of 10 primary features of a product or 5 primary features of a product. And you can, for the most part, probably pull up 5 references as like social proof. So let's say you're dealing with like 5 to 15 individual things that you want to test. In each ad, you can put 4 of those in. Let's say if it's a 15-second ad, I can spend the first 3 seconds on the hook. I can spend the next 10 seconds on made in Italy, super good quality, featured in Men's Health, Forbes, GQ, and 50,000 5-star reviews. And then the last 2 seconds, I can focus on the CTA. So let's say you can test 3 or 4 things at once in each ad. If you're dealing with 15, if you have 15 hypotheses, those being a mix of features, USPs, pain points, social proofs, you don't need many ads to test those. It's not that hard, actually. You make 10 ads, and in 10 ads, you can test all of those things. If you put enough budget between them and behind them, you can test which one of these, general aspects speak more towards my target demographic and towards my customer. And again, it's a thing of granularity, right? Like if I'm targeting the pregnant women versus the women who just got divorced, I can think of a whole suite or a bundle of these USPs, features, and social proofs, which would probably work better with the pregnant women versus the women who just were recently divorced. And so I can, I don't have to be as granular on things. I can be more generic and see if these features resonate with one target demographic versus another. And then if I see it's working best with pregnant women, feature A, B, C are working best with pregnant women, then I can go more of a deep dive into that. And I can feature more or change out more subtle things in those USPs, how I frame them, because framing is also something that is, on this testing spectrum is like, okay, feature A is the quality. How do we communicate that? Made in Italy, sneakers that you can run a marathon in, leather from whatever exclusive manufacturer, made in the same factory as Chanel. Those all speak towards quality. Those all signal a high value good and a high quality good, but they're framed completely differently. And so, yeah, feature number A is quality. Is that relevant? I don't know. You don't have that many feature ABCs, those meta features. You can always get more granular into things.
And that's the case in step 2, which is USPs. But in step 3, there is a million things to pick from. You can pick location, you can pick vibe, you can pick colors, you can pick fonts, you can pick, whatever. So how do I decide whether it's best to shoot the product in Bali or in Marbella or in Stockholm or whatever? And how do I decide on all the million of things that I potentially could test?
The only way to do it is to try. Like you have to segment things into meta categories, and you have to see like, okay, in content and in the scenes, I can be in, let's say, 3 different environments. I can be in a tropical climate. We did this with Saint Normal, right? Like overall, like we can get very granular on things. We can say, okay, does stuff shot outside on a beach versus outside and near the water, does that do better than content that's shot in a city? But we can get, we can segment these things into meta categories. We can say, does content in warm climates or cold climates do best? So don't focus on any more detail than that. Shoot 2 pieces of content, one in a warm climate, one in a cold, rainy climate, and see where your audience reacts best to. Once you know that the cold climate, or once you have the data that the cold climate did better, okay, great, now we can get more granular. Is it shots on the street? Is it shots when it's raining? Is it shots when there's other people around you? So yeah, I would say like the only way, there are a million different things you can test, but with everything in each of these 3-4 different steps, you have to segment them into meta categories, and you have to segment them based off of like, how broadly can I segment these categories, and then go deeper into what's working and, discard the stuff that isn't working.
And what role does data have in this?
I mean, data is how you make decisions. Data is the currency on which performance marketing is run on. data is the only way for you to validate and for you to assess if version A did better than version B. It's the only way to validate our hypotheses and to see what worked and what didn't. So you might think that content shot in Marbella in a warm climate might do better. I might think it's better here in Sweden where it's raining and people who are buying in Scandinavian countries are going to resonate more with that. Who's right? I don't know. That's what data tells us. And that's what data is confirming, and that's who we're going to trust. It's not going to be based off of experience or any of these superficial things. It's going to be based off of the qualitative data behind the scenes that we're actually getting.
Och nu ska vi ta en kort paus för att prata med dagens sponsor Beyond Retail. Varmt välkommen Niklas Winroth, grundare av Beyond Retail. Varför grundade du Beyond Retail?
2012 när jag grundade Beyond Retail så var kunskapen om e-handel generellt väldigt låg. Vi såg många företag som hamnade lite snett i sina e-handelssatsningar. Man valde fel teknik eller man litade för mycket på tekniken eller man saknade resurser för strategi eller genomförande. Så där såg jag en möjlighet till att hjälpa till. Och min enkla tanke var egentligen att starta ett managementkonsultbolag med laserfokus på e-handel och digitala affärer. Där vi kunde hjälpa bolagen med de problem som de stötte på vägen mot digital tillväxt.
Och vad är det ni gör på Beyond Retail då?
Väldigt enkelt uttryckt så tillför vi digital kompetens med en unik kombination av konsulter, rekryterare och utbildning. Så är vi ett riktigt powerhouse vad det gäller digital kompetens och transformation. Men den största delen i vår verksamhet är konsulterbjudandet och där erbjuder vi rådgivning, projektkonsulting och interimskonsulter. Vanliga roller som vi kliver in i är Head of E-commerce eller CRM manager. Vad det gäller projekt så är det ofta strategiprojekt eller det kan vara replatforming, byte av plattform vad det gäller e-handel eller CRM till exempel. Men det som vi kanske är mer kända för är rekrytering. Och det är inte så konstigt för vi har gjort över 600 rekryteringar inom e-handel och digitalt. Och det som blir mer och mer vanligt är att våra kunder kombinerar de här erbjudanden och vi kan då sätta igång en rekryteringsprocess samtidigt som vi skickar in en interimskonsult som då kan kalibrera processen och sen när man då väl har hittat den perfekta kandidaten så kan den få en väldigt bra start och vi kan gå vidare till nästa roll och göra om samma sak igen och på så vis så kan vi bygga digitala team tillsammans med våra kunder.
Och varför gör ni det ni gör?
Först och främst för att jag tycker att det är otroligt kul. Att kunna komma in med våran toolbox och våra erfarenheter och kunna skapa värde för bolagen och verkligen se hur vi kan realisera deras fulla digitala potential. Det är väldigt belönande och känns väldigt meningsfullt. Samtidigt vill vi också verka för att driva e-handelsbranschen framåt. Så kunskapsdelning och utbildning är också väldigt viktigt för oss.
Stort tack till dig Niklas Winroth på Beyond Retail. Nu fortsätter avsnittet. How often are founders or, the head of brands wrong in their guesses of what performs good or bad?
For the most part, the clients that we work with give us a lot of free rein and let us decide these things. And for the most part, they've been able to understand that advertising, as opposed to something like social media, you can take more risks and you can produce stuff that is a little bit not brand native, right? Like your social media, for example, you post something, it's very hard to change that. It looks bad if you take it down. There is way more risk associated with posting something on your Instagram, for example. Everything has to be much more homogenous, much more aligned with your overall theme and your overall direction as a brand. On advertising, for example, you can put $10 into an ad, $50 into an ad. You can show it to people who have never seen your brand before. And you have much less at stake. There's much less risk involved in that in terms of potentially diluting your brand image or spreading yourselves too thin. So yeah, to answer your question, brands have been pretty lenient on these things and have understood that, on an advertising space, we can take more risks and we can try different things. So I wouldn't say there has been like an instance where a brand has made a completely wrong decision and has told us like, you need to do this. I mean, if that has been the case, brands have come to us and say that we want it to look like this. And we have urged them to like test alternative B as well. If they don't test it, that's their loss. Like that's why we always tell brands, sure, we're going to produce whatever you want us to make, but please run what we think will work as well, because no one knows. Like, I don't know, you don't know. The only thing that knows is the data, and the only thing that can prove to us what works and what doesn't is the data. So,
and should data be the only decision-making factor, or are there other decision-making factors involved as well?
Good question. So data is the most obvious one. You can make skewed decisions based off of data. So you can make decisions that worked in a small test scenario where you spent $100 or $500 on an ad. And sure, you can take the risk and you can make all your ads look like that. And that might not work in a campaign where you're spending $150,000 a month on it, right? So it's always important to take things with a grain of salt and not take it as like the holy grail, like, okay, this ad did great in our testing campaign, let's make every single ad like this. You always want to have stability in your main campaign, in your, let's say, your Advantage Plus shopping campaign. You want to have your evergreen ads, which are running and which you know you can rely on. You want to have a testing campaign, which you can test new things in, and you slowly want to move ads that are working in your testing campaign to your overall, your global campaign, right? And then you can make decisions slower and you have a lot less risk. And I would, to answer your question, say that, yeah, then data becomes like, that's the most important decision-making factor, as long as you're not using it in a reckless setting, in like, yeah, I'm changing my entire advertising strategy because one single ad did really good in our testing campaign that reached 50,000 people.
But is there a decision-making factor that is called gut feeling? And how many percent of the 100% of the decision-making process should, gut feeling get when you take decisions in there?
I don't know. If you have the data to back it up, you should rely on gut when making those first hypotheses, when understanding or deciding if like resources are scarce, we can test warm climate or cold climate, or we can test different products. Which one is it most worth? We can't do both. Like that we don't have enough money to do both. So that's where I think gut feeling comes into play, where it's like, okay, I think that, the environment is more of an important characteristic and will lead us to a higher potential return on investment than specific product features or specific things about the product. So that's where the gut feeling comes into play. Once you've decided on one thing, once you've decided to test the environment, then go for it and trust the data. So yeah, I don't think that gut feeling is as important. If you have the data to back it up, if you've run 40 different ads and 3 got all of the spend, got 95% of the spend in your entire campaign, trust that data. That means that like Facebook knows what it's doing. Trust in the beast behind the scenes to tell you that, okay, these ads out of your, $1,000 budget got 90% of that budget. Those are your ads. That's what works. Keep testing that and keep iterating and see how bulletproof that assumption is and how bulletproof that result is by continuing to invest in that same sort of content and seeing if it continues to perform. But don't take that as the holy grail. Don't take it as like the holy mecca and like, okay, great, now that these 3 ads performed, I'm going to change my entire content strategy and only do ads like this. Because you might move that to a global campaign and it might not work. So
yeah, so you always got to have in mind the risk management. So you got to diversify your bets, basically.
Yeah, 100%.
But how much spend do you have to put behind one ad in order to test it?
Depends how fast you want to get results. So I would say in a particular ad set where you're testing anywhere from 5 to 15 ads, you can go for as little as $50 a day on an ad set. It'll take you 2 weeks maybe to get data. An ad set as a whole should probably spend between like $300 to $500 up to $1,000 as a whole until until Facebook gives you accurate readings on what's working and what's not. If you have an ad set which is getting spend and is not getting any purchases after like $500, that probably means it's not working. But you really have that's where your performance marketing team comes into play and is able to make those accurate decisions and those accurate assessments for you. That's not like we don't focus on performance marketing in any way. Like we're just content based and we work as a team and as a very integral part with the performance marketing department of any kind of brand. And so yeah, that's where I think you would be better to take the expertise of your performance marketing team and they assess the results of like, okay, this worked. They diagnose essentially what happened. They say, okay, these 3 ads got spend, but not a lot of spend, only 2 purchases for each of these ads. I don't think it's enough data for us to make a concise decision and an informed decision as to like, yes, that's an evergreen ad. Let's keep making more stuff like that. So yeah, it depends on the setting. Trust your ads guy, because that's who knows what's working and what's not and is able to tell you, okay, great, these 3 pieces of content worked, make more like this. These USPs worked, these features worked, go run with that.
And before we talk about the content production and how you scale the content production and whether you should do it internally or externally or through UGC or whatever, I want to know more about the A/B testing process of ads. So exactly what does it look like? Like, how do you A/B test ads? Now we have a budget, you should spend about $50 per day for about 1 to 2 weeks to get some sort of an indication of whether that is an ad that works well or not well, or somewhere in the middle. But exactly what does an A/B test of an ad piece look like?
So I'll give you two examples. One is with one of our clients, Monos. They're a Canadian luggage manufacturer. A second one is with our client, Built Basics. Two different ways of testing. Monos, we kind of went into things and we didn't have a very clear hypothesis. They gave us free reins. They said, literally do whatever you want. So we tested all different types of content. We did stuff in a really high-end studio where it was like kind of staged and looked quite fabricated. We did stuff that was super organic, literally just us traveling with the suitcases, throwing them into bins. It was a pretty like dynamic relationship with their team as to like new ideas and what we can try. And we created, I think, like over 150 ads for them. And there was no clear, okay, this is exactly what we're going to test. This is exactly, the strategy that we're going to have. And this content is going to be different from that content in this way. We were just like, let's create as much diversity, not be too concerned about like the minute details in that diversity and see what works. That's option number A, or option A. And that works if you have enough of a budget and you have a tolerance for ads that might not perform well. Like whenever you do a creative testing campaign, that, for the most part, your creative testing campaign is not going to have good results as a whole. You're going to spend money and you're going to lose a large portion of that money on stuff that doesn't work. That's just the nature of creative testing, right? So if you have a high tolerance for that, then sure, that route also works. You don't need to have a very clear testing strategy or testing plan and say, this is our 3-month roadmap and exactly what we're going to change. But that's, again, option number A. Option B is what we did with Built Basics. So Built Basics came to us and they said, hey, we're looking to expand our product category and expand our brand internationally. We've started, we're doing really well in the States. We want to start capitalizing on market share outside of the United States. We've started running the ads that we're doing in the States in different markets and they're not working. We're getting horrible results. They said, fix this, come up with a solution. So we looked inside of their ad library and we took kind of a deep dive and assessed all the content that they're running. And we said like, the reason it's not working, our hypothesis is it's just way too American. You have these super American models with the slick hair and the snapback carrying a surfboard in like Palm Springs with palm trees behind them in the beach. Like Europeans don't like that stuff. Like that, it's just way too American. That's way too tacky. Your styling of your products, like they had these skinny pants on with this like super tight t-shirt. I'm like, bro, Europeans do not dress like that. Skinny jeans in Northern Europe have not been a thing for a long time. And so that is like an overall style trend. I see that you're wearing skinny jeans. So. As like an overall style trend, skinny jeans have not been very popular. And so I said, you need to make your content less American. Like that's what's going to work in Europe. And for them, we set up a very rigorous testing plan because they were like, we don't want to overspend. We don't have that big of a budget to spend on Europe. Like we want to make sure that each decision we're making gives us valuable data and valuable results. So we said, okay, first thing we're going to test and most important is language. Okay. They had 5 different markets. They had the Netherlands, they had France, Germany, Spain, and just 4 different markets. Oh, and Germany, yeah. So 5 different markets. We said, okay, we're going to create the exact same piece of content. It's the exact same underlying asset, the exact same ad. One's going to be dubbed in German. The other one's going to be dubbed in English. One's going to be dubbed in French. The other one is going to be the English one. We're going to test each of these in each market and see what does best. Great. After that, we got results. We saw that, okay, in France, content in French does best. In Germany, content in English does best. We're not going to waste any more time and effort and resources on creating German content in Germany or English content in France. We're only going to focus on what works. That's step number 1. Great. Step number 2 is, okay, what overall, again, going back to meta categories, features, USPs, value adds of your brand work in each market. The brand was like, there's 2 different approaches. You can do like, hey, this is Built Basics. They make amazing clothing for leisure wear, for athletic, for going out. They're really versatile. It's a one-stop shop for kind of all the clothes that you need. Or you can go super like detailed into each product and you can say, well, these are the best pants because of this, this, and this. They're super stretchy. They're super breathable. They have these great big pockets. They look really good. They don't wrinkle. Does the German market care more about the overall brand USPs or do they care about the product USPs? Do they care about the actual practicality of the pants and the stretchability and whatever? Or do they care that like, great, Built Basics is my next one-stop shop for everything? And you test that in each different market. Great. Now we know that English content in Germany does best. Let's test if brand content and brand USP versus product USPs do best. You collect that data, you make decisions, and you, again, don't waste any money or resources in Germany testing brand content, because that's not what works. The Germans care about practicality, they care about the features, they care about the individual characteristics of each product, so focus only on that. That's step number 2. Then we said, great, we have that learning, we can go into step number 3. We can see what product category does best. Like I said, they have leisure wear, they have sportswear, they have formal wear. Do the French care more about the leisure wear, the sportswear, the casual wear? Do the Germans care more about that? I don't know. Let's test each product category and let's see what works. So that's a very meticulous way. That's option. I keep saying number B, but B is not a number, it's a letter. Option B is being super meticulous and super, structured on how you test things. But both work. So,
and to me, there is a lot of tests going on all the freaking time, and you got to test these over weeks and months and years. And you also got to know what used to work 1.5 years ago, because that is a learning that will be important to apply today. So there's got to be some form of a structure to know exactly what have been the learnings from the past and how can we apply these for the future. So my question would be, is there different tools that you usually apply for this, or do you do this in a Google Sheet, or how do you partly follow up on the data and partly summarize all the learnings for each and every freaking market that you have done tests for?
Sure. So two aspects to that. One is like before we get involved, and the second one is after we get involved. So before we get involved, it's very important that we sit down with our clients and we look at their ad library from as long of a history as we can pull. And we try and understand, or we try and, discuss with them what has worked, what hasn't. Can you give us any sort of insights or information on your customer, what they resonate with, so we're not doing stuff that you've already tested and you already know that works and doesn't work. So that's a pretty straightforward, like you sit down with the brand, you try and understand these things, and you going into things should probably have a better idea of what has worked for this brand and what hasn't. So they can give you some specifics on like, hey, like I said with Oliver Cabell, content that is super far away and you can see the whole outfit, that's never worked. Don't try that. Like, don't waste your time and energy on that. People only want to see hyper-focused details, close-ups of the product. So great, we're not going to focus on any far back full body shots. Wonderful. That's one learning that you can take from a client before you start working with them, and you don't have to waste any time or energy testing yourself. Wonderful. Second is like what we do after that, and how after we start working with the client, we organize things, which might be more towards what your question was leaning towards. We've taken a less structured approach on these things because it's more so like you can pick up on these meta trends as you create content and as you create variation. So an example with Monos, for example, because we were very unstructured with them, we didn't have a clear testing psychology or testing process. We kind of just threw whatever we could at them and they put money behind it and saw what worked. We saw two really interesting things. So one was that the more organic storytelling UGC, like us actually going on a trip, pulling the luggage through the airport, come with me on my, backpacking through Europe trip, that stuff did really well. What also did really well, which was a real shock to us because we really prided ourselves in that engagement on creating this super high-end, super elevated UGC. We rented out these crazy studios, crazy architecture, like everything just looks so polished and well done, and we were so proud of that. And they came to us and they were like, hey, we want to shoot some content in an airport. We think it's really important to put the luggage in different sizers, and they're like Ryanair sizers. And we were like, ugly-ass sizer, what do you mean? So, okay, we did that. We shot some content in the luggage, in the Ryanair sizer, and they came back to us and they're like, okay, two pieces of news for you. One, this super organic traveling stuff is doing really great. The other stuff, which did really great, was the Ryanair sizers. And we were like, you've got to be kidding me, man. Like, we put all this time and energy into this crazy nice studio, crazy architecture, like really every single detail, and you're telling me what did best was a fucking Ryanair sizer? Like...
And that's quite common, isn't it? That, what you believe in the most doesn't really work out, and the other way around. So you got to be really, really humble and trust the data.
100% trust the data. And so, okay, great. What do you do with that information? They've come to us and they say, these are kind of our conclusions after running all 150 of these ads. Okay, conclusion is we're not going to fully ditch the other side of things. We're not going to fully ditch this very well polished in the studio type of content because, again, in advertising, everything works in a funnel. So one ad, which might not have gotten a lot of traction, might have like a 1.6 ROAS, but was getting a lot of spend. That might be because it's contributing to someone's purchasing decision at a very top funnel stage of things. Whereas an ad that was really close to the bottom funnel, really close to that purchase point, that had a really high ROAS, but that's only because the person knew about the brand and you spent money acquiring them and you spent money giving them awareness of your product with another type of ad. So we're not going to completely abolish this other type of content. But what we are going to do moving forward, let's say our next batch, we work with them on kind of like monthly installments. Our next batch of content, we're going to try as much as we can to make everything we do feel more organic. All of the scripts, the scenes that we shoot in, the settings, the models that we work with, the type of content that we produce. So everything is going to try and feel more organic instead of like they want us to shoot now with their new toiletries case. Instead of it being very well polished on a nice concrete table where we open it and we have this really nice hand model that comes in and shows everything. We're still going to do that. But what we're also going to do, which we haven't done, which we would not have done in the past without these learnings, is test the super rugged in some not dirty hotel room, but not super aesthetic, throwing it in, putting a voiceover behind it. This is my favorite traveling toiletries case. You can hang it up. It's not going to get dirty. It's not going to get wet. It's not gross. And be very, very organic with these things. And you're going to test both of those pieces of content. And you're going to continue to validate that hypothesis and continue to validate that result that they came back to you with. And, you continue to do this until you have more data and you have more insights, and you continue to make decisions based off of, like I said, what's working and what's not, and continuing to validate different results and validate whatever hypotheses you have.
But to me, it seems quite risky, because what if the performance marketing manager or the marketing manager or maybe the brand manager, the person that has all this information quits? Then you hire a new person that doesn't have this knowledge, this context, this background of these are the aspects or the USPs we should focus on and not focus on. How do you, collect these? How do you build an information or knowledge library that can last for, or that can be used within the company, maybe for many other aspects, but also for just future performance marketing?
Sure. It might be a little bit outside our scope of work. Like I said, we don't do any of the performance marketing. That's usually something that our clients bring to us. We only focus on the content side of things. And I would say that we are as well an integral part into understanding what is working and what isn't. Sure, performance marketing team comes back to you and says, hey, asset ABC did best. I don't know why, so take from that what you will, right? We have to go in and we have to dissect that information. We have to dissect those ads and understand what led into creating success for these individual components and for each of the individual components of this ad. So we also hold, as an agency and as a third-party provider, a lot of meaningful data and a lot of meaningful insights. How do you store this? I mean, we haven't had this problem yet. It's not something that we've dealt with yet, but you do bring up a valid point. There should be some way of documenting this and some way of transferring this knowledge if at one point we no longer worked with them, the performance marketing team no longer worked with them, because a lot of those learnings we would kind of take with us. But with everything, we try and be as transparent as possible and communicate, okay, why did we change our content direction? It's because you told us these ads worked. These were the learnings that we got from those ads. So we're going to present it to the whole team. Okay, every week we get on the call with them. We show them, this is what worked. This is what didn't. This is why we think this worked. And this is why we think this didn't. So moving forward, here's what we're going to test. We're going to test content only close up. We're going to test content with a female voiceover because that narrative did a lot better. So the client should, always be informed along this process. And I think it's really a collaborative thing that we do with everyone on the team. It's not like we have this behind the scenes, we're making all these decisions and they don't know anything. And if we leave, they're completely screwed. So.
All right. So now we've been talking about the process of, how you prioritize different things to test. And then we also spoke about the A/B testing process itself, on exactly how you achieve that and, execute that. But when it comes to the content production process, I think that is a big ass challenge for many brands, because the output has to be so freaking big, and 9 of 10 brands or 99 of 100 brands do have a limited budget. So I want to talk about more how to scale the content production process. And you run Rework, you guys are, that's what you do, right? You create content for your clients. So how do you scale content production?
So I would say there are two main ways of doing this. One is with more like a limited budget, and one is with a more excessive budget. That one you might already start to imagine how you could do it if you had seemingly unlimited cash. So option number one is you can get quite crafty with things and you can repurpose. You don't need to shoot. And again, this might be a little bit cannibalizing our business, but not all companies need 50 brand new ads every single month. You can work with one ad, repurpose that content inside of that ad, and come up with different messages, different narratives, different USPs. You can put text overlay on top of an ad, which accomplishes almost as much as creating a brand new ad, a net new creative with a brand new, like everything shot completely differently. So if you're working with a very limited budget, I think there still is a lot that you can do without creating net new concepts every single time. And again, repurposing a lot of the stuff that you had before and crafting a different message and a different narrative with that to try and uncover more about your customers' psychology, more about who they actually are. Second option is like, okay, if you do have the money to test net new concepts, then what are we going to focus on? What's going to be like, what are the primary categories? Like I said, the meta categories of things that we need to test. Where do resources go for each of these? And when, at what point, I think this is the most important, at what point do we stop investing in category A? And at what point do we have the learnings to say, okay, this works and this doesn't? And now we're going to focus only on category B, and we're going to put all of our time and effort and money into category B. Because again, yeah, like you said, you don't have unlimited resources. You could test a million different things. Prioritization is really a key for any company in terms of scale. That's probably one of the most important things when it comes to scale, is like, what's going to be the most important, what's going to be really the revenue drivers, and what are we going to get the most information off of, and understanding when you have the information and when you have enough data to back up.
What are common mistakes companies do when it comes to content execution?
Not taking enough risk. Like, for the most part, brands have done high-end content in-house, like I said in the beginning, for as long as they've been. For the most part, a lot of brands have done high-end content in-house, and they have overseen the entire process from start to finish. And now working with a lot of brands don't have the internal competencies to produce this more UGC, this more organic side of things, which is what really works nowadays, especially top funnel. And that's, again, where I think we as an agency play a really big part in coming in. And, you know, as a brand, you have two options. You either bring that in-house, that's timely, that's expensive, that's, you know, your results are not guaranteed. Second is working with a bunch of individual creators, like I said in the beginning. You don't have consistency there. Individual creators are a pain in the ass to work with, as I'm sure every brand owner knows. And so what do you do? And I think an excellent solution in kind of like the short, medium term is work with someone like us who you can develop a good relationship with, who you can see that is proficient in what they do and responds promptly to all of your requests, and who can create a homogenous and a brand native style of content for your company. So yeah, I would say that's like a big part of where we come in. But to that, to answer your question, it's a hard thing to convince a brand to just try new content and see what works. Because like a lot of the times they have this perception, like I said, on social media, of everything we put out there is going to be out there forever and we can't take it back. And like, what if it has this negative connotation towards our product or towards our brand image? And you have to sort of tell them like, hey, don't worry. Like, you have to be open to testing. You have to be open to making mistakes. Otherwise, you're never going to learn. And otherwise, you're never going to be able to scale your content production. If you keep everything super conservative and super on a straight line, you're not going to learn anything. So yeah, convincing them to take risks is an integral part in this entire process.
Yeah, and I can imagine that is super common for brands that are, you know, especially brand driven, or where let's call it the brand ego internally is big, right? That they think they know how it should be done, but the data is potentially telling something different.
Yeah, and that's also where is a big lesson that we've learned in like running a marketing agency. There are clients who are going to have that big ego and who are going to think that they know best and they don't want anything. Like, they don't actually need your service. You're not actually that big of a value add. At the end of the day, you're just executing.
And what that essentially is that they don't listen to the customers, right? So they force their idea of the brand out to the world, while it not necessarily is what creates the optimal demand for the brand and product they have.
Sure. And I mean, like, look at Apple, right? Like, that was Steve Jobs' philosophy. He never did any focus groups. He never did any kind of customer testing or trying to understand what the market wants. He told the market what they want and had the biggest ego in the world. And I guess it worked. Like, Apple's the most valuable company in the world right now. So sure, that might work if you're Steve Jobs and you're running Apple. But for the most part, I think it's valuable to listen to your customer and listen to what they have to say.
And I think it's simply risky because it's so complex. On top of that, also changes on a minute, second basis, because what you bet on essentially is, basically guessing on the demand on different markets and with different products, and it's too complex to analyze for me. So I can't analyze, what works in the status quo of the world and what doesn't work in the status quo of the world. So you gotta have 80% of the decision making that is made by and through data.
By 100%, I think it's actually a refreshing thing and it's a liberating thing, because I don't have a lot of experience running a brand myself, but I would assume that, I've worked with a lot of brand owners, and I can imagine the pain that they must go through in that you don't know what decision to make. You really don't know what customer is going to be your best customer, or what product category or what feature, everything that we've been talking about is going to work. So I think, it's a really refreshing thing to have this backup and to be like, okay, great. Well, we can just test everything and we can see what works. And again, test everything with a very big caveat. Like, you have to be structured in that. Not every brand has the resources to actually test everything. So put stuff into meta categories and try and segment based off of that. But I think it's a really refreshing thing for brand owners.
And let's talk more about content production. And you can partly, as you said, do content production internally, which you obviously should do. You can also partly do content production externally. Externally can be through an agency like Rework, or it can be through influencers and UGC creators. So there's a bunch of ways of doing this, and you should probably test all of them and see what sticks and doesn't stick. What's the best case when it comes to content creation that you ever have seen on the market? Like, what company is the highest performing one when it comes to content, and what do they do to perform on that level?
Actually, best companies are the ones that, like you said, have a healthy mix of all of these. So as we were talking earlier, for C'est Normal, you're saying that content from the founders and from people on the actual team, that's the stuff that's really resonating, and that's the content that's performing well, and a lot better than sending it to influencers, for example, who don't know anything about the brand, who are just reading off a script. And that makes perfectly logical sense, because what you're doing when you're advertising is you're telling a story and you're trying to convince someone of something, right? You're trying to convey value to a person. So I think the best person is the founder, is the individual who has the most knowledge about a brand, about that product. That's just going to be the most authentic, right? Like, if I created this shoe, I'm probably going to be the best person to try and convince you to buy this shoe and to tell you the story around like why this shoe is so impressive and why you should purchase it. That's not scalable. You obviously can't have the founder of the brand creating 50 pieces of content every month, especially if you want to scale the brand to like 8-9 figures. So how do you then transition that and bring other people, other stakeholders into the equation to outsource that content creation for you while maintaining the same level of authenticity and the same level of like conveying value to other people? So to answer your question, I think the best mix, or the best companies, have a healthy mix where it's like you have your internal competencies that you know very well can execute a particular type of asset. For the most part, it's this high-end asset that you can create in-house. Great, you have that, you know it works. Don't stop doing that. But also work with individual content creators, see what they can produce, see what they perform, work with different agencies, see what different agencies can do, see what results you can get and what type of content works. Don't be scared to test. Don't keep everything in-house or only work with one content provider. Continuously search for solutions and continuously search for different options to fulfilling your content needs. It is such a wide spectrum, and like there is really no right or wrong at the end of the day. There is, I think, no harm in testing something new. Again, yeah, you could spread your resources too thin. It's a capital allocation equation at the end of the day, but like test as much as possible. That is like really the narrative that I think I want to drive home through all this.
Can a direct-to-consumer brand have too much content?
No, I don't think that's a thing. I really don't think that. Yeah, you can have too much content in the sense of like you don't have the money to test it. Because if you push 100 ads out and you're getting $5 a day in spend on each of those ads, and after a month, none of them have gotten any purchases, you're wasting your time, right? So that's something that we've realized with Koyo, for example, who's one of our clients. At the beginning, we were like, great, let's test this, let's test that. Let's try and get we were launching like, I think it was like 25 or 30 ads a week, which is a lot. They're not spending that much on ads. That much, I mean, all things considered, not enough to test 30 ads a week. And we realized like, okay, we're testing all of these things. One, it's draining our ROAS because our testing campaign is taking a lot of the budget from like our ASC campaign, which is actually making money. So profitability doesn't look great. Clients don't love that. And second, our tests are not that meaningful. We started testing stuff that was way too granular, way too minute. We didn't prioritize correctly. And we also weren't getting valuable data. It was taking a long time for us to get that data. So yeah, you can produce too much content in the sense of like, I don't have the means to test it and to put enough money and budget behind it. But if you do, if you had unlimited budget to work with, no, there's no such thing as too much content.
And how do you streamline content production?
We do everything in-house. So we have a very, very close-knit team, and that is something that I learned from the other business ventures that I've done in the past, is like keep things as close to home as possible. I think like talking more as to like the pains of doing your own thing and being an entrepreneur. Like, I really think the biggest roadblock to success for any company is people. Just straightforward. Like, that is acquiring, but also firing and letting go of people are the hardest things to do when growing a business. So I've had other ventures in the past where like we took on way too many people way too quickly. We lost so much money, so much time taking them on, and also letting them go when we realized that like we don't have the resources to keep everyone alive and to keep everyone fed, and there's not enough stuff for everyone to do. And like actually it'd be way more valuable if we just had a small team. So with Rework, we took things completely differently, and we said, okay, it's going to be a small team. Everyone's going to have equity. Everyone's going to have skin in the game. And that has led to an extraordinarily motivated and ambitious team of people who we work with. And I think that's the only way to do it. So yeah, we keep everything in-house and we keep everything very close to home. And we're able to run a very efficient and streamlined operation through that.
And what exactly does that look like?
So we have myself, we have my two co-founders, Fleur and Stella, and then we have another partner, Daniels in Latvia, who we work with, and then we have two content creators who are on our team. One's in Portugal and one's in San Diego, and that's it. That's the entire team.
So everybody basically flies into the same location. You do a 1 or 2 day shoot. You have a rough idea, or maybe an exact idea of how to execute that. I think, being clear in the outcome of the shoot should probably be super important in order to get an efficient result.
Yeah, I mean, when we go into things, we usually have a very clear idea of the style of assets we want to produce, because going in and just shooting content can be quite vague and not produce the best results. So for the most part, before we go into something, we say, okay, here are the general concepts we want to do. We have some brainstorming, we look at competition, we look at what other people are doing, and we know, okay, there's going to be 15 different types of assets. Each of them are going to have this type of variation. This is what we want to test with each asset. And we go into things knowing, okay, did we get the shots for this? Did we get the shots for that? Because otherwise, like, you shoot a bunch of stuff, you come back, you start editing it, and you realize, like, okay, nothing really makes sense. There's no storyline here. It's kind of random. So yeah, important to have everything laid out, beforehand.
So how many percent of the total work of one shoot is before the shoot, is the planning part of?
Maybe 20%.
20% of
yeah,
it.
20% before, 60% during, and then the other 20% after. Maybe more after. Actually, after is like, you don't really have, you can't plan everything to a T. It also, like, you get to set, you realize what looks best, what doesn't. Like, this idea you had in mind really doesn't look good. It looks like shit. Okay, we're going to toss that. We're not going to do that. And also, like, coming up with whatever voiceover or whatever overlay you want to put after that is a fluid thing. It's not like, okay, at the beginning, this is exactly what it's going to be like. It is as well reactive to what we shot, what looked best, what we could convey in like a efficient storyline. So it's a dynamic thing. It's not like you can have everything planned out. You go into it and like it's ABCD shot list. It's not like in a movie set where you have a very precise shot list and you know exactly what's going to happen, and then the editor takes it and knows exactly where to place all the footage. It's a very fluid thing where you have some kind of idea going into it. You shoot something sometimes completely different when you're there. And then afterwards, you're like, okay, how can I piece everything together? So,
and there is like 1,000 of different AI tools to, produce content or edit content to make things more efficient. What kind of tools do you guys apply for your content production?
We actually don't use anything for content.
Why?
Don't use any tools. I think there's a certain level of quality and certain level of consistency that you can reach, and that I think you dilute by using these types of tools. Sure, if you were really trying to reach mass scale and you were okay diluting quality, then perhaps going into these things might be relevant. But we're still at a point where like we can produce everything in-house with our internal resources. We're not strained for resources internally in terms of like content production. So I don't think that there is value in going into these tools that I think inevitably do reduce quality in exchange for quantity. But we don't have that problem. Like, we don't need more quantity right now. We have enough people to execute everything that we do. So for the meantime, I think keeping it in a human brain.
Yeah, and there's so many AI tools out there, and they all promise, so big things. But to be honest, it's only ChatGPT that actually delivers value to people right now, as I see it at least. And this will probably change in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. You can automate, content creation on a totally different level. But today, I think when we're recording Q4 24, it's barely usable to apply an AI tool that automates a content piece from a picture that you upload.
I've seen brands do it. I'm not the biggest fan of it. There are, like you said, a lot of different tools. So I've seen brands use like auto dubbing tools where it takes an ad and it dubs it in a different language, and then it like changes the mouth of the person. And it looks okay. Like, to someone who's not really paying attention, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. And if you're selling like a $25 product, maybe it doesn't matter. Like, maybe it's just a matter of getting in front of as many eyes as possible. If you're selling a $500 suitcase, then I would argue that your customer demographic is going to see that, and they're going to notice that it's an AI generated dub. Or I've also seen these AI generated voiceovers, and like they're pretty believable. Yeah. And again, if you're selling a $25 product, you might be able to get away with it. But I would argue that, again, for a high value good and for someone who really cares about brand image and about quality, it's not worthwhile to dilute that in any way, even if it's 5-10% for the increase in quantity that you can achieve.
Yeah, and how about the balance of quality and quantity? I mean, you want to create as much output as possible. You want to achieve as many ads pieces as possible during one shoot. How do you balance that in the best possible way?
It's, again, a equation of prioritizing and what you choose to focus your time and effort towards. And I think that you should choose whatever these meta categories are and then focus on like the quality inside of those meta categories. Again, there is quantity that you can achieve after the fact, and you don't always have to have net new creatives to achieve quantity. You can have a very high quality piece, and you can achieve quality through smaller variations, again, on the text overlay, on the music, on the voiceover actor, that can reach your quantity goals, but don't dilute on quality. So there are, I think, efficient ways of maximizing both of those things.
So now we've been walking through basically everything when it comes to content creation, A/B testing, and how you should prioritize everything within that. I'm super curious about the learnings from the past years now that you have when you've been doing rework. So what's the biggest flop when it comes to content production that you've ever made?
So we started, like I said, at the end of this year. We started actually taking things seriously in January. And for the first 3 months, we didn't make a single dollar. And we were just testing the water. We were trying to get clients. We were trying to see if this is actually something that people value. And then in month 4, we signed 4 deals. And we were like, this is amazing. Wow, great. We have it figured out. We have the whole agency underway. And we produced all 4 of those assets for those companies. We thought they did really well. And they all came back to us and they said that, yeah, this is not really what we were expecting. This is not, I mean, for better or for worse, like this is not the type of content that we want. This is not what we want to run ads on. There's different things for each customer that like didn't really float their boat. And that to us was the biggest flop, because we were so hyped. We were so excited that after 3 months of not making a single dollar, we finally had these 4 clients and this was going to be our exit. And like, that's what's going to take us home. And after, when none of them came back, it was a very humbling experience, and one that like I won't forget ever. And after that, we were like, okay, we have to keep pushing. We have to keep finding what value we can provide to individual customers. And it became like a chase for who actually has value and who actually has need for what we do. So not changing your offering and changing, you know, the product that you're selling to the customer, is finding the customer that actually wants what you can do best. Because then you're just going to dilute your service offering. You're going to dilute your product offering. You're not going to be not going to have something that you're proud of. It's much, much, much more efficient to search for clients that actually resonate with what you produce, have a genuine need for what you do, and have the money to pay you for what you do, than to change your product or service offering for each individual customer.
And what is the weirdest ad that you ever created that you never thought would perform, that performed like hell?
The weirdest ad that we ever created was for a skincare company, and we decided to slap mayonnaise on our hands and use that as the hook for the first 3 seconds. This was, again, before we had this whole like super refined brand image that we were only going to do these super refined UGCs. We were really trying everything. And we said, okay, let's slap mayonnaise on our hands, and that's going to be the hook. And nobody thought it was going to work. And that was the top performing ad. That was like the #1 thing that everyone wanted and the best hook. That and the Ryanair sizers that I was telling you about earlier, when we were investing all this time and energy into super high-end luxury content. It was the fucking Ryanair sizers that did best. That was a disaster.
And how much money have you guys spent on an ad that you really truly believed in would work? You know, you had big ass hopes that this ad would be the one that fixes every single problem for the company. And then it was just money down the drain.
We have, like, you mean us personally spent money, or the customers?
The company,
spent
the
money?
customers.
Not a lot. I mean, like, if you see an ad's not working, you can assess the performance of an ad within like a few $100s. So it's not it's not like a billboard where you have to invest $50K and then it doesn't work. So you can respond really quickly to what's working and what's not.
And what's the most money you've spent into something that just was money down the drain? Meaning, you know, a location you rented or something you did that you truly believed in and thought like, shit, this will fix every single problem for the brand I work with. And then it was just money down the fucking drain.
Right. I mean, initially at the beginning, actually, we had really high hopes for shooting everything like internally in our own studio. So we invested a lot of money into lights, into cameras, and we realized that like customers want stuff that is supernatural, that doesn't look staged, that doesn't look like it's in this super high-end studio. At least for our type of work, maybe for podcasts this works. But yeah, we invested a lot of money into super high-end production stuff that at the end of the day we realized is not what people want, and we can shoot everything on an iPhone.
And how much money was that?
I won't disclose the full amount, but it was in like the six figures.
Okay, so millions of SEK if you go SEK. Six figures
okay,
dollars.
Sure.
Okay. And what content piece has been the most off-brand that you've ever created for a brand?
The most off-brand piece we have ever created. It would probably be this mayonnaise slapping one. Like we had this cosmetics company that we was working with. Like I said, it was a cream for men, and they were really fixated on having these crazy hooks at the beginning of their ads. And we said, okay, we'll do whatever it takes to make these crazy hooks. So we didn't take anything seriously. We said, we're going to try whatever we can. And like I said, we had this ad where it literally started with someone putting mayonnaise on their hands, and it was like, this is not this is not how you do skincare. And that was the ad that worked. And we were like, this is not like anything we've ever done before.
Cool. And Paul, thank you so much for flying in to Stockholm to do the podcast recording. As you know, I really, really prefer doing those in person so we get to film it, but also just because the vibe is much, much better.
100%. Thank you for having me.
So if you would have to recommend only one thing to the podcast listeners, what would that be?
In life, as an agency owner, as in content.
You decide in whatever.
I decide in whatever. One thing I would recommend to people: choose wisely who you work with. I mean, whether it be your internal team, whether it be your clients, whether it be your third-party service providers, like people are the most important aspect of life, the most important aspect in business. And if you choose those wisely, everything falls into place. And there's very little friction in life, and stuff becomes much easier. And you'll start to feel this like natural flow in life. So choose the people that you surround yourself with and that you work with very, very wisely, and it's very, very tempting in business to take deals from people who you don't actually align with and you don't feel like there's real synergy with, but the money is there, and those will never work. There will always be a point where like the friction becomes too big and is just not worth it for you anymore. So choose people wisely.
And if the podcast listeners want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Of course, you can go over to our website, www.rework.com.
Och vill ni komma i kontakt med mig så gör ni det lättast på LinkedIn. Sök på Björn Pålman Spenger så finns jag där. Glöm inte att följa oss på YouTube, på LinkedIn, på Instagram, på TikTok och såklart i Podcaster och Spotify. Och glöm banne mig inte att ratea podden i din podcast-app om du gillar det vi gör. Jag vill också tacka dagens fantastiska sponsor Beyond Retail. Beyond Retail är ju Nordens ledande digitala tillväxtbyrå. Beyond Retail hjälper till att e-handelsbolag ska nå sin nästa nivå genom skräddarsydda tillväxtstrategier, genom sjukt smart performance marketing och innovativa lösningar för att stärka både försäljning och varumärke. Om du letar efter en partner som verkligen förstår e-handel och som kan guida dig genom både möjligheter och utmaningar, då är Beyond Retail rätt val för dig. Gå in på beyondretail.se för att läsa mer. Det stavas BEYONDRETAIL.se, och vi kommer såklart också att länka Beyond Retail i show notesen. Tack Beyond Retail för att ni gör framtidens e-handel möjligt och för att ni driver branschen framåt. Jag vill också tacka våra fantastiska producenter Michaela, Dorch och Fredrik Ankarsköld. Glöm inte prenumerera. Stort tack för att du har lyssnat. Vi hörs igen nästa fredag klockan 06:00. Hej!